Welcome. I am Andrea Hobley, Vice President of the League of Women Voters, Woodbury Cottage Grove area. The purpose of the League, national, state, and local, is to empower voters and defend democracy. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. Its mission is to encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League strengthens our communities by promoting voter registration, conducting candidate forums, and informing voters on public policy through education. And now I'll turn it over to Liz Nordling, who is our moderator today.
Good evening and welcome to this League of Women Voters Forum for the candidates in the November election for District 54 Senate and House. My name is Liz Nordling and I will be moderating this forum tonight. This forum is being broadcast live on Channel 18, which is Comcast, Channel 8542, which is CenturyLink, by the South Washington County Telecommunications Commission, SWCTC. It'll also be live web streamed on the SWCTC website. The order for speaking tonight will begin in alphabetical order by race, and then will be rotated thereafter. Candidates' remarks are being timed to assure equality of time, and the seating for the candidates follows suggested guidelines. Questions have been submitted via the local league's website, and questions may also be texted or called during the live forum at 612-756-8164. Texting is preferred. That number will be across the screen throughout the live forum. So if you have a question, please text it in. The candidates are, for Senate District 54, Carla Bingham and Leilani Homestead. For House District 54A, Ann Claflin and Keith Franke. For House District 54B, Kelsey Waits and Tony Juergens. We'll begin with opening statements, and we'll begin with Carla Bingham.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this event on tonight. It takes a lot of work, and so just certainly appreciate it, especially during these times. I want to say hello to everybody watching from home, and I'm Carla Bingham. I'm the state senator for the area, and I am seeking re-election to the Minnesota House because we have a lot of work that still needs to be done when it comes to our businesses, our schools, healthcare, the environment, and a lot of other topics. And I have built relationships throughout this district, whether it's with businesses, schools, hospitals, and residents, because I show up, I listen, and I respond, which is what you need to do in normal times, but especially in these unprecedented times. You know, we need to listen to each other, we need to help each other, and we need to lift each other up because we are all in this together. And I certainly look forward to the questions and the discussions tonight.
Thank you. Now with her opening statement is Leilani Homestead.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, League of Women Voters. My name is Leilani Homestead, and I am running for Minnesota State Senate as the endorsed Republican candidate. I have lived in Cottage Grove for 27 years. My 3 daughters were born and raised here, and they call Cottage Grove their home. 21 of those years, I have owned my own family child care business. I have experience making budgets, negotiating with families, and taking care of the most important people in our society, children and families. I look forward to serving as your state senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Next with her opening statement is a candidate for House District 54A, Ann Claflin.
Hello, good evening. I am Ann Claflin, and I am the DFL endorsed candidate for House in District 54A, and I'm running for re-election. I am an environmental scientist by my background. I came to this job because we needed more people that understand science representing us in the legislature, especially in this district. In the East Metro, we have so many issues with our groundwater. We have issues with energy policy. We need people who can think and make decisions based on data. I also come to this job from my background in organizing with my union. We won paid parental leave in our contracts, and immediately I wanted that for everyone else in Minnesota. That was something that inspired me to run for State House, and I'm looking forward to returning to the House so I can keep working on environmental issues and getting paid parental leave, family medical leave, and earned sick and safe time for all Minnesotans.
Thank you. Next with this opening statement is Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to the league for putting this on. I guess I'm going to try and be brief. A lot of people ask me why I would want to try and do this again. This will be a rematch of the last election in this hyper-partisan climate. Considering the amount of money and the negative attack ads and mailers that were put out against me and the things that were done in this environment. And that's exactly why I'm running again. We need to bring people back that work across the aisle, that have a proven record of bucking the system like I have, of despite everything that goes on, we have a lot of challenges, as everybody will agree, and we need people that are willing to go to the table, put all of that aside, get the work done for the people of our district. I love serving this community, and I believe that records speak for themselves, as was proven by the Pioneer Press in my voting record. So feel free to Google that and check it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next with his opening statement, candidate for 54B is Tony Juergens.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this event on tonight. It's much different than it has been in past years when the room is full of citizens that are here with us. So hopefully they're watching and sending their questions in. I'm the incumbent state representative for 54B. I've been in this position for 2 terms as I'm seeking re-election for my 3rd term. And I've lived in this district for almost 28 years. My wife Dawn and I have 2 daughters. Tori and her husband live in Hastings, and Alexa and her husband Tony live in Cottage Grove with their twin babies that were born in January. So I have ties to this community. I have ties to the entire district. And this is a time when we all need to come together and support each other, and we have a lot of work to do in the next session.
Thank you. Next with her opening statement is Kelsey Waits.
Right, so as others have said, thank you so much to the League for putting this forum on tonight. So growing up, my family lost our house due to medical bills, and I worked hard, but I couldn't achieve my dreams alone. I was invested in by my community and by the government. When I left home, my mom told me to pay it forward. So running for state representative and advocating for lower healthcare costs and quality education is my way to do that. My family and I moved to Hastings when my husband left active duty military service, and I've continued that dedication to service as chair of the Hastings School Board. I'm not a typical politician. I'm a statistician and a researcher. Hyperpartisanship is hurting our communities, and it isn't enough to simply listen to all perspectives. We need to work together to get things done. In a nonpartisan office, I've had the opportunity to do just that.
Thank you. We'll now go to questions, and the first question goes to you first, Kelsey. The state faces a likely revenue deficit due to costs combating the COVID-19 pandemic and reduced income from business and individual taxes. What remedies do you propose to avoid a deficit at the end of this and the next fiscal year?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think this is a really important question. And with my role on school board, this is something we're also struggling with as we work to figure out how to overcome a deficit in our own spending. And what we've said is that we need to all be working together. We need to have all options on the table as we look at where we can save money and also where we may be able to bring money in. What are our different options?
And when we come to the table as a school board, we don't have partisan hats on. We don't have particular agendas that we're looking for. What we're trying to do is solve the problem for our community and do what's best for our community. And that's what we need to do now more than ever, is figure out how we can set our divisions aside and come together to determine the best way forward for all Minnesotans.
Thank you. I understand that all of us should be closer to our microphones so that we can be heard. The question next goes to Keith Franke.
Would you please repeat the question, Liz?
The state faces a likely revenue deficit due to costs combating the COVID-19 pandemic and reduced income from business and individual taxes. What remedies do you propose to avoid a deficit at the end of this and the next fiscal year?
Thank you, Liz. Being a small business owner of the Park Cafe locally and Frankie's Corner Bar, this is something that I battle with every day. And we need to help our small businesses stay afloat, stay alive, stay open, so they can keep people employed, to keep those tax dollars flowing in to the state. And we need to do everything we can. We also need to remember not to leave behind our nonprofits like our American Legions and our VFWs that also are impacted the same way that other industries are, but they do not get the relief because they're a nonprofit, but they employ so many people. We need to bring together people that are willing to set aside whether this might go here or might go there and get things accomplished. And I think, once again, that it's just so hard right now, seeing what's going on at the state, that there's no communication. And we are having the inability to get things done.
Thank you. The question now goes to Carla Bigham.
Oh, thank you. I'd just like to point out that the state has to, by constitution, have a balanced budget. And so there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We have to do it. So I think the first thing you have to look at is what programs aren't working due to COVID or are not going to be as effective due to COVID, and either eliminate them or amend them so that they do work in this new way we have in society. First and foremost, I think we have to pass a bonding bill. Bonding bill would invest in our infrastructure, create jobs, put money in the pockets of Main Street of workers, and then in turn in the pockets of Main Street businesses, and keep their doors open. I think the federal government needs to continue to step up and help small businesses and nonprofits like the Legions to continue to keep our doors open, and also expand broadband so that the economy and small businesses are more efficient and effective.
Thank you. The question now goes to Tony Jurgens.
Thank you, Liz. As Senator Bigham said, the state of Minnesota is constitutionally bound to balance the budget. We're not like the federal government. We can't print money. We can't deficit spend. So the upcoming session is a budget year. So that will be the top priority. Everything else is going to have to fit around that budget discussion. Now, in our surplus that was projected back in as recent as February, that disappeared almost immediately, that $2.5 billion deficit or surplus, and now we are looking at a certain deficit going into the next biennium. To balance that, you can do a couple different things. You can either raise taxes or you can cut spending. I propose option 3, which is get the economy cranked up again where it was before, when we had budget surpluses year after year. Where we're able to safely reopen the state, that's what we need to do. We need to begin to open the businesses so that they're paying taxes and contributing to the budget.
Thank you. The question now goes to Ann Claflin.
Thank you. This next session will be full of hard decisions. There will be, well, we never have easy decisions to make in the legislature, but it'll be harder than usual. But this crisis has hit people differently. Some people are really in the middle of crisis, while others are going on with their lives as normal. We have the capacity to raise revenue. We have to have the guts to do it. We absolutely need to fully fund education. We need to look at how we're funding transportation. We do need to figure out how we can raise money And that's a really hard conversation to have when we're all feeling this economic crisis ourselves. But we do have that ability to find ways to raise money to pay for the things that we really care about and really value in Minnesota. And as Carla said, we have a bonding bill that's up. Bonding spurs our economy. We need to get that passed. And as a scientist, I think of things in an ecosystem. You have to think about the whole state.
Thank you. The question now goes to Leilani Homestead.
Thank you. We had a surplus starting before COVID, and now we have a major deficit at the end of this year. Our governor has not made any cuts to the budget through this time, with many employers being laid off and losing their incomes and businesses not being allowed to open. I have lost income with my business. I needed to make cuts, not to the needs to my business, but to the wants of the business. Why shouldn't government have to follow the same rules or the same guidelines? We do need to balance the budget. Historically, we know what Minnesota's response is. We are one of the top 5 states in the nation for high taxes. That is because historically we've fallen back to raising taxes. I am interested in watching and being a good steward of taxpayers' pockets, and I will not support raising taxes.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional comments? Then we'll move on to the next question. It goes to you, Leilani, first. Do you support defunding our law enforcement? Address the statewide police reforms passed in Minnesota this year. Do they move the state in the right direction?
Can you repeat all of that again?
Do you support defunding our law enforcement? Address the statewide police reforms that were passed in Minnesota this year. Do they move the state in the right direction?
Thank you. When I'm talking to voters, this is a concern that everyone has. They want to know that they are safe. They do not support defunding our police. Reforms are helpful, and all the careers that I'm aware of is that we all need continuing education. I see no problem with continuing education for law enforcement. Again, I do not support defunding the police. We need to know that we can be safe, especially in the times of the riots and people are concerned about their safety. Thank you.
Thank you. The question now goes to Kelsey Waits.
Thank you. So as a military spouse, I would never disrespect people who wear a uniform to protect our communities. There is a role for police officers in our communities, and they have a very important job. The problems that our communities face are not all caused by the same thing, and they can't be solved by the same thing. Not all problems can be solved by police officers. And so one thing that we've talked about in Hastings, and we've worked as a community with our local law enforcement, is what does this look like from a community perspective? How can the community and law enforcement have these difficult discussions and talk about what's best for individual communities to make our communities safer, not only for the community members, but for our police officers as well, who are asked to be put into positions that they shouldn't be put into. And so for me, this is really a bigger conversation that we need to have with the community and law enforcement.
Thank you. The question now goes to Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz. Technical difficulties over here with the microphone, sorry. No, I definitely do not believe in defunding our police, not whatsoever. If anything, I believe that we need to increase funding. We need to improve training. One of the reasons I was such an advocate with Tony and Carla on the Hero Center was to give our police the ability to do a better job for our communities. We need to do things like, I remember back when I was mayor of St. Paul Park and we hired the first female police chief in this area. And one of the first things that I required was that myself, the new chief, and my city administrator went to some bias training, and I met a lot of good people there, and we had good discussions. And we need leadership from the top down. Our police need to know, and our first responders need to know that we have their back, and that we're gonna do things to help them have the ability to improve their job, and give them opportunities to train to do a better job, to make them feel more safe and make the community feel more safe.
Thank you. The question now goes to Carla Bingham.
Thank you, Liz. Absolutely not. I don't support defunding the police. It wasn't even an option of a proposal from Democrats, so it's just a partisan swipe. I am proud to have earned the endorsement of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, as well as the Minnesota Professional Firefighters. I was proud to make sure that in the Senate, I was the chief author of the legislation that created the Hero Center, along with Keith and Tony. And I think when you look at what society has failed to do, addressing generational poverty, systemic racism, inequality in healthcare, education, the economy, all of that has fallen on the laps of law enforcement. And they do not have the tools to handle that. That is up to us to come together and address those issues and not leave it on them. So, no, I would never defund the law enforcement.
Thank you. The question now goes to Tony Jurgens.
Thank you, Liz. Absolutely not would I ever support defunding the police department. Cities that choose that option are going to get exactly what they hope to get, which is less law and order. I've spent dozens of hours riding with police officers in this district and elsewhere in the metro area. And the jobs that those individuals are doing is extremely hard. I've seen it firsthand. I'm still telling stories of the things that I witnessed on those ride-alongs, but they do it every single day. They have to assess in seconds if the person that they're coming to help is having a mental health breakdown, if it's a drug situation, or if they're an actual threat to the officers. They have to do that in a matter of seconds. So we need to increase training. We need to show them the respect that they deserve and earn. They're out there every day protecting us. And I'm also proud to have received the MPPOA endorsement.
Thank you. The question now goes to Ann Claflin.
Thank you. No, I do not support defunding the police, and as Carla Bingham said, that was not on the table. In fact, it's a scare tactic used to divide us. What we realize in my district is in Newport, we don't actually have a police department. They contract that law enforcement capacity to the Washington County Sheriff's Department. Not having a police department doesn't mean you don't have law enforcement. Now, our law enforcement officers are providing a public service, and they're called on to provide these services, and often they're services that they're not trained or equipped to provide. So we need to give them the training. We need to give them additional supports like social workers who can go on calls with them and help respond to some of the situations that they are called on to respond to. And to answer the second part of the question, do the reforms move us in the right direction? Yes, they do, but they don't move us far enough. There's still more that we need to do, and I look forward to working on that in the legislature.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional comments? Carla?
I forgot about the reforms. There is a piece in the reforms that I was a chief author of that passed in the special session that protects what our first responders, law enforcement, firefighters, and other first responders disclose in peer counseling and critical incident stress management debriefings is now going to be protected because they can't unsee what they see. I'm the daughter and sister of a firefighter, and they need to be able to talk about what they see. And this protects that so they can get the help they need because we need to take care of our heroes.
Anyone else? Additional comments? Keith, Frankie.
Thanks, Liz. I'd also just like to add that I had heard that some people have talked about taking school resource officers out of our schools, and I did not support that either. I believe that the younger we can introduce children to a positive experience with police officers, the better we can build relationships. We need those positive relationships within our community to build a connected community. So I believe that's something that everybody should probably answer to also.
Anyway, Tony Jurgens.
Thank you. Keith just mentioned school resource officers. Down in Hastings, Officer Jake Willers was just promoted to school resource officer at Hastings High School. And Jake, or Officer Willers, is one of the officers that I rode with last December. And I know that he's going to be just a outstanding role model for those students. From the interactions that I saw him make the night that we rode along, the compassion that he showed to people, that is the type of role model that I think that the high school kids need to see.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes,
I also
Leilani.
support officers in the school. I think it is a great resource for children, for our youth, to see positive role models and support in the school.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Kelsey.
As a school board member, SROs is something that has just come up to our board to determine whether we wanted to continue with our SRO contract. And importantly, when we looked at school resource officers, we reached out to our students to determine whether they were having a positive impact of those officers being in the school. Because we need to hear from our students and we need to know that they feel safe. And so we did continue with our school resource officers because we saw that positive connection, but not every district has seen that.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question, and it goes first to Ann Claflin. Considering recent events, how would you address racism in the state?
And I only have a minute to answer this. One of the ways that I am approaching some of the racial and social injustices is to look at environmental justice, because that's something that I am very well informed about. People who live next to highways have higher incidences of asthma because they're exposed to air pollution. Those folks tend to be lower income, they tend to be minority populations. So while we're looking at racial justice across the board, we can't forget about some of those environmental justice pieces. Another part that's very important to me is that our Constitution still allows slavery. We have to change that. It still allows slavery in terms of when people are imprisoned. That is unacceptable, and we need to get every mention of slavery out of our Constitution. Working on environmental issues, I'm also looking to make sure that all of our state feels open to everyone.
Thank you. The question now goes to Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz. I would do things like I've done in the past. I remember when I was in the legislature, we were debating the protester bill. And I was one of, or if not the only Republican to vote against it. I voted against it in committee, and I voted against it on the floor. I brought together people, going back to the bias training that I brought the chief through. I met a man named Jason Soul, who was one of the heads of Black Lives Matter in St. Paul. He also moved on to be affiliated with the NAACP in Minneapolis, and at the time, over those couple of years, we became friends. And when we were debating those, I asked Jason to bring some friends, and we talked in my office for a long time. This is how I work, to bring people together from opposite sides. I may have been the only Republican to ever have those discussions with those groups. So that's what I'll continue to do. I will continue to lead by example.
Thank you. The question now goes to Kelsey Waits.
Along with Ann, 1 minute is not really adequate to address racism in the state with the second highest racial disparities in the country. Racism and racial disparities permeate every system in our government, whether we are talking about healthcare, education, or, as Representative Claflin said, environmental racism. These are real problems, and we need to get at solutions. And so I'm very proud. One of the groups that I work with in Hastings is Thrive Hastings, and I'm on the steering committee for that group, and we've been working for the past couple of years on how we educate our community We've brought in speakers, we've worked with the schools and the city government in order to try to talk about these problems from a community perspective. We've also worked on really trying to reach out and amplifying the voices of the people who are most affected by the racism that we see. And that's one of the biggest things we need to continue at a state level.
Thank you. The question now goes to Leilani Homestead.
Thank you. I believe as a state, we need to open up our places of worship where we are given lessons and taught how to behave and how to treat others. I don't believe government has a role in your thoughts or your attitudes, but it does have a role in behaviors and actions. I think we need to look at other sources other than government to solve our problems.
Thank you. The question now goes to Carla Bingham.
Thank you. I think acknowledging that it exists and understanding that, as Kelsey said, Minnesota has one of the highest racial disparities in the state across the board. And I think it starts with addressing the issues head on, creating the space, and listening and acknowledging, continuing to talk about diversity and inclusion in every system that we have. Post-maternal health of African American women is skyrocketed because of, compared to white women, because of the lack of access to affordable health care and being able to have the access to prenatal and postnatal care. That should not be controversial. That should be addressed head on. And we as a state need to focus on that as well.
Thank you. The question now goes to Tony Jurgens.
Thank you. You know, I was raised to believe that you judge a person by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And in recent years, we've had implicit bias training at the legislature, and I've learned that there's a little offshoot to that. And I grew up thinking you see a man, not a black man. You see a woman, not a Hispanic woman. You take the race out of it. But with implicit bias training, what I've learned is it's okay to recognize those differences. They want you to recognize those differences. We are different. We're not the same. And as a white man, I maybe can't relate the same way that a black person can, but I can listen to them. In the days after the recent riots in Minneapolis, I went first by myself and then a second time with a bunch of legislators to actually talk to the people whose businesses were destroyed and to hear from these minority owners of the challenges that they were facing. So it starts with listening. And
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional comments? Then we'll move on to the next question. It goes to Tony Jurgens first. Upon completion of the 2020 census, Minnesota will draft and enact new district maps, redistricting. The state legislature is responsible for drawing these maps. Do you support the current process, or would you propose changes? Why or why not?
well, first of all, this is a great reason for everybody to vote Republican this fall. The maps are going to be drawn by the legislature and the governor. And the governor, of course, is a Democrat. If the Democrats have control of both the House and the Senate, they'll be responsible for drawing the lines, and those lines will be most likely drawn in favorable matchups for them. I think that the current process works. I've heard a lot of discussion about creating a separate commission or a separate board, but that's only as nonpartisan as the people that are appointing those individuals. And so the devil's in the details with something like that. I think that the current system can work and should work. And if there are a divided government, most likely will end up in the courts anyway. But in the end, I think we generally end up with a good product the way it is.
Thank you. The question now goes to Kelsey Waits.
All right, thank you. So I would say the current system does not work. It doesn't work where legislators are put in a position of picking their voters rather than voters picking their legislators. And we know that people who are elected are also human, And we also know that we live in a divided two-party system. And as long as we are having parties draw the district lines, we have a problem. And if the current system tells us that we'll just go to the courts, that didn't work. The courts should be the fallback. That's not where we should just plan on going. I would firmly support a nonpartisan commission to be doing these boundaries, and there are some really fantastic ideas out there about how we can work together and make sure that no one party is bringing in the people to represent us on that commission.
Thank you. The question now goes to Leilani Homestead.
Thank you. Hearing what has been discussed, I agree with Tony that yes, you do need to vote Republican for this election. They're mentioning a committee. I just want to say that that would be non-elected officials. And I don't support having non-elected officials deciding boundaries for our state. We do have a two-party system, and I do not support having a one-party rule for our state.
Thank you. The question now goes to Ann Claflin.
Thank you. There are more than just one reason to vote this year, and we need to look at things beyond redistricting. However, that's a very, very important consideration for our state. Another reminder for everyone to complete their census so that we keep our congressional districts. Everyone is out looking for their edge all the time, but one thing that I want to see in our redistricting is that nonpartisan panel, but clear standards and criteria for how we set boundaries. Things like, are we keeping districts compact so you don't end up with an oddball, long, snaking district that just happens to design in a favorable demographic? Are we keeping cities together or splitting them unreasonably? The things that we're using to design are just as important as who is designing it.
Thank you. Question goes to Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz. Right now, I would lean more towards the current process. To say that a commission can be nonpartisan, you have to look no further than Facebook. Everybody has, as in back to the last question, a bias, a preference. And how can a nonpartisan commission be held accountable? Legislators can be held accountable. They can be voted out. The people can let them know how they feel. So I think it needs to be shown where is there going to be some accountability. No, I'm not completely adverse to it because I have not researched the other options. But my personal feeling and belief is that almost no commission is going to be 100% nonpartisan. It's just in our nature as human beings.
Thank you. The question goes to Carla Bingham.
Thank you. I think the overt and blatant partisan comments by a couple of the members of this panel show why their current system does not work. Only one time in the 90s has the legislature, I believe, actually drawn the maps, and that was because of a misfiling by a governor. And so the bill just went into law then after that. The courts should not be the group, it should be the fallback. I do believe that having a nonpartisan panel, maybe of retired judges or referees, would be something to take the gerrymandering out that you have seen being tied up in many courts. A lot of the court cases are around that. Also, I believe the federal government should vote to continue and reaffirm the Voting Rights Act that has expired.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional comments? Yes, Kelsey.
Yeah, just in listening to responses, there have been a number of comments that a commission cannot be nonpartisan, but neither can partisan elected officials. And so as we talk about this, as we say that there's options that legislators can be voted out, that's the whole problem that we're seeing, is that through gerrymandering, a vast majority of our districts are safe districts for one party or the other. There isn't competition, and there isn't that ability to vote people out in the way that we like to think that there is. And we need to move beyond this and address some of the problems within our own system, like gerrymandering.
Thank you. Anyone else? Keith Franke.
I would also like to piggyback on that a little bit. That, yes, I think part of the issue is that both parties need to admit that across the United States, there has been and will probably continue to be gerrymandering of some type. And we do need to be open to other options. But at this point, personally, I have not looked into enough of them to see what they are, but this is also the problem with a two-party system.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll move on to the next question, and it goes to Kelsey Waits first. How do you propose to overcome the hyper-partisanship that is so prevalent and counterproductive to the public's needs?
I think that's an incredibly fitting question, given the one that we just came off of. And Keith Franke even mentioned that with the issues with the two-party system and the divisiveness. And one candidate alone or one representative alone can't combat this. We can't break it down. But there is a huge problem with partisanship right now. And we see it on Facebook, we see it at the legislature, where people are not communicating with one another. And now more than ever, we need to figure out how to go beyond this. We are in the middle of needing to recover from a huge economic and healthcare crisis. This is the time when we need to work together. And so we need to look at the systems that are going on in our own government that are contributing to the hyper-partisanship that we see. And one of those is gerrymandering. Another of those is talking about how we are in this two-party system and this loop.
Thank you. The question now goes to Carla Bigham.
Thank you. You know, I think continuing to work across the aisle on legislation that really is important to the district. And, you know, I'm in a fantasy football league that is all Republican except for me. I'm the Democrat in the league. They'd rather have a Democrat than a Packer fan. You'll have to take it up with them. But I have sponsored legislation and passed a lot of bipartisan legislation throughout my time and tenure in the legislature. Most recently with Senator Karin Housley on whether it was protecting the 3M settlement or reform on in-home daycare. It is important that you set aside the party label and you put people ahead of politics, put people ahead of the party, and listen and understand that it takes stepping aside and wanting credit to get things done, and that's what elected officials have to start doing to address the issues.
Thank you. The question now goes to Ann Claflin.
Thank you. I've enjoyed working across the aisle in the legislature, and I've gotten to know a few of my Republican colleagues on the Jobs and Economic Development Committee very well because we share the same values. We really do. I had a bill that was signed into law to expand access to workforce training, and it was a bipartisan bill. It was passed bipartisanly and was passed in the Senate. It works. We can do this. But even when we share the same values, I ran into roadblocks, not within the House, but within colleagues in the Senate that, I'm sorry, Carla. But it was the Republican leadership in the Senate that wanted to hold the governor accountable and simply refused to hear our bills. They're holding constitutionally dedicated environmental funds hostage because they don't like something that the Pollution Control Agency is doing. That's the hyperpartisanship that we're seeing.
Thank you. The question now goes to Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz. I guess for me, I'll just continue to do what I've always done. I walk the walk, I don't just talk the talk. As I pointed out before, St. Paul Pioneer Press, this guy, I'm very proud of it. The most bipartisan legislature, and I think it was 2017, Google it. I voted down the middle after all the votes were tallied, more than any Republican or any Democrat. it's not just about getting together or getting some other person from a different party to sign on to your bill. It's actually doing the work with them. Carla pointed to the 3M settlement. Carla was having an issue with the Senate in the settlement, and I had Carla's back. And we worked together to get her on that bill. And I pushed back on the Republican Senate and got those things accomplished. And that's what I'll continue to do. Just saying it on a bunch of fancy flyers and just talking about it, no, this guy here, he actually gets it done. I've proven it, and I'll continue to do it for this district.
Thank you. The question goes to Leilani Homestead.
Thank you. We've heard here tonight the two-party system is an issue. I disagree. We need a two-party system. It brings a balance and a discussion, and it's equal representation of the state. I also hear that people are willing to reach across the aisle and to work together, but I hear partisan blame, that it's the other party that's not doing their job. And that to me is an oxymoron. How can you reach across the aisle and then blame the other party for not working with you? That doesn't make sense. And it's not about the parties necessarily, but it's about the voters. And we need to make sure that our government represents the values of the voters, because it's the voters who are in charge. Thank you.
Thank you. The question now goes to Tony Jurgens.
Thank you, Liz. You know, a year ago, I would have said that, and I did say that the partisanship that you see in Washington is a lot worse than it is in Minnesota. That here in Minnesota, that a lot of what you see on the House floor is the debates, and it's more partisan. And then when the session ends, we walk across the street together and we talk about how your families are doing. And there's still some truth to that. But as we get closer and closer to the election, that becomes more and more out the window. One of my best friends in the legislature is a Democrat. I was texting with him today on some issues. I'm on the Capital Investment Committee. It's the most bipartisan committee that there is. We spend days, 17 days on buses traveling around the state of Minnesota looking at projects together. We have our meals together. We are on the bus together. And you have to work together in order to get things done. I frequently have people come to visit me in my office and they tell me that a Democrat told them they should come and talk to me because I'm a reasonable person. So I'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional comments? Yes, Kelsey.
Yeah, I want to add partisanship games are played by both parties. It's not one party or the other that we're seeing this from. Our system is designed not to promote bipartisanship. The very people who are in the center and are able to reach across the aisle more are also the seats that are most likely at risk to be flipped, to have that person voted out. This is also part of a bigger problem. And this is something that, as a political scientist, I have spent tons of time researching and would like to work on.
Thank you. Anyone else? Additional comments? Yes, Keith Franke.
I guess I would just like to add that you need to be willing to push back against your leadership, which I had done in the past. And I guess it also speaks a little bit to how I was revered in the Minnesota House when, on my very last day after the last session, the now Speaker of the House came up and said, you know, Keith, whenever you're ready, we have a seat for you. So that kind of speaks to how respected and how well I work with the others.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll move on to the next question, and it goes to Carla first. Do you support laws that require background checks on private gun sales and red flag laws, which give law enforcement the ability to confiscate weapons from those believed to be of risk to themselves and others?
So I think that bills that were introduced early on last session or the session before were not ready for prime time. And then regarding both of those topics. And then I went to some folks in the Senate, members of the Senate that work on these issues. And I said, the same people that are going to be impacted by having to knock on the door right after a domestic and have to remove a gun from someone's home, and the folks that have to regulate and arrest people for this need to be supportive of the bills. So when the bills were changed and MPPOA, the Minnesota police chiefs, sheriffs, and county attorneys supported it, then I support it.
Thank you. The question now goes to Leilani Homestead.
I believe the red flag laws, there's no due process with that. And there's no consequences for somebody who lies. I think that's a slippery slope, and we need the courts to decide if someone should not have their Second Amendment right. The loopholes are a slippery slope, and I think that we have enough gun laws on record to protect, and we need to enforce the laws that we have.
Thank you. The question now goes to Ann Claflin.
Yes, I do support background checks, and I do support red flag laws. I acknowledge that neither of those would prevent every single senseless act of gun violence. That will not protect everyone, and it will not solve all of our problems. I do want to make sure that people understand that with red flag laws, there is due process. You do go before at least an administrative law judge, if I'm not mistaken, and there is accountability if someone falsely makes a statement. This is not somebody just saying out of spite that they want to seize your guns. You do have a right, and it's not taken lightly when out of safety, that's brought into question. So I do support background checks, and I do support red flag laws.
Thank you. The question now goes to Kelsey Waits.
Thank you. So I believe we have a Second Amendment that we need to protect, and I also believe that we have a gun violence problem in this country. And it is beyond time that the two parties figure out how to work together to come together and address this problem. I do support universal background checks and red flag laws, as do a majority of Minnesotans. I am also open to having more discussions with others as to what other opportunities there are in order to address gun violence and what do we do to protect our communities. 80% of gun deaths in Minnesota are self-inflicted. Veterans are twice as likely to commit suicide as the general population. These are people that we need to work to protect. And if setting up a red flag law and trying to save a veteran from taking their life in a moment of PTSD saves their life, then that's worth it to me.
Thank you. The question goes to Tony Jurgens.
First of all, I want to thank Kelsey for mentioning the veterans and suicide. Today is Suicide Awareness Day in the country, and I had a bill this year that, because of COVID and the way things went, the hearings then kind of stopped, but it was to draw more awareness to the prevention or spend money on the prevention of veteran suicide. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that the laws we have now just need to be enforced. I'm not in favor of infringing on people's Second Amendment right with a lack of due process. I think that if the judges are enforcing the gun laws that we have right now, that we don't need to change we don't need to change those right now.
Thank you. The question now goes to Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, that's funny. I have here in my notes to bring up suicide and the suicide awareness world today because of the fact that just in the last few months, my circle of friends and family, we have experienced 2 suicides. So I just want to remind everybody out there with this opportunity during these crazy times of isolation and despair to check your people. Make sure everybody's doing okay. Now to the question at hand. When I was there, I have not read the current statutes. When I was there, I did not support red flag laws. I would not support that bill. I did get myself in a little trouble to vote to continue discussion on expanded background checks. And this is where I fall into a little trouble sometimes, being a Republican, but also wanting to continue the discussion. The vote I took was to continue the discussion, but people took that as a vote for the bill. but that was not the case. I wanted to have the discussion, and at the time, the people in power did not, so.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Carla?
I want to add that the red flag law was, legislation was changed as originally introduced to only have police officers be the one that can be the folks that petition to remove the gun, where before it was anybody. So that is also a point that has changed in the legislation that I think is pretty significant. I also want to say that I wholeheartedly believe in the Second Amendment. I have a carry permit, I own firearms, and date night with my husband and I sometimes entails going to the gun range and then having dinner. So there's nothing that would infringe on the Second Amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Leilani?
Thank you. Carla, I'm glad that you have your conceal and carry. I think that voters are looking for consistency, and they want to know where their legislatures stand. You have voted against many of the gun laws for our Second Amendment, and so we're looking for consistency, and that's one area where my opponent, Carla, does not walk the talk and stay with consistency.
Thank you.
That Senate has never voted on it since I've been there, so.
Anyone else? Unfortunately, that was our last question, and we are now going to move to closing statements. And we will begin with our two candidates for Senate, and we'll start with Leilani Homestead.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Carla, for the discussion. I am not a career politician. I represent most of the people in this district. I'm a working mom. I own a business. I represent your values. And I think that at this point, we need to decide who's going to most represent your values, not based on necessarily by party, but by values. And I will be the candidate that will represent you in St. Paul. I hear at the door people are concerned about COVID and education. They're concerned about law and order, and with our budget deficit. Those are issues that I am concerned with as well, and I will represent you. Thank you.
Thank you. And now with her closing statement, Carla Bigham.
Thank you. I want to again thank the league and for everybody who is watching at home. We had fantastic questions and appreciate Leilani participating. I humbly ask for your vote on November 3rd because we need somebody that's going to bring people together, not obstruct. We need leadership, we need experience, and we need somebody that's going to continue to deliver for this community. And so I'm asking for your support on November 3rd. If you would like to know more about me, carlabigham.com. And if you would like information also on how to vote early or receive an absentee ballot, please go to mnvotes.org. And really appreciate the honor it has been to be your state senator and hope to continue in this role after November 3rd.
Thank you. Those are your two candidates for Senate District 54. Now we will hear closing statements from House District 54A, and we'll start with Keith Franke.
Thank you, Liz. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in tonight that tuned in or may watch this later on. Once again, I just have to reiterate, in these times of hyperpartisanship and just the sheer out craziness that is going on between politics and in some of our cities and nationally, I am asking for your vote because I have proven time and time again that I can set all that aside. I can find ways to find solutions. I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. I have the ability and the passion and the compassion to get these things accomplished. I would like to take these last 10 seconds after, how bad the campaign went last time to ask my opponent if she would be willing to agree to the clean campaign compact because your campaign hit me pretty hard last time with some pretty serious stuff that I did not appreciate. So Matt Little's got something out there. I can read it to you right now if you would like.
Thank you. Your time is up. And now with her closing statement is Ann Claflin.
Thank you. I was actually planning on bringing that up, that I will pledge to run a clean campaign. And I'm familiar with Matt Little's statements. I also encourage everyone to look at who is paying for the mail that you're getting. Sometimes it's really small print. I know it's hard to read sometimes, but look for who's paying for it. It's not always coming from the candidates. It's coming from independent groups as well. And I'm asking for your vote tonight because of my values and the values that I believe that we share, that we want people to have the care that they need. We want people to be able to access health care. We want people to be able to achieve their dreams. We need to fully fund education. We need to take care of education all the way from pre-K, childcare, up and through job training. People need the time to care for themselves and their loved ones. There is so much we need to do to make sure we have safe communities. Please vote this year. You can find a lot of information at mnvotes.org and more information about me at anneformnhouse.com.
Thank you. Now with their closing statements are our two candidates for 54B, and we'll begin with Kelsey Waits.
Thank you again to the community members who submitted questions and participated. Like many of us, I have been incredibly frustrated by the toxic partisanship that we've seen, and for a very long time, it discouraged me from participating in the political process. But what I've learned over the past few years is that we don't have to accept that for the way that it is, and we can make our voices heard, and together we can make change, and we can change politics. I believe in a politics that is positive, that empowers people, and that achieves real results for our communities. And we do that by working together. And so I would love to work with you and advocate for our communities in St. Paul. And I hope that I can have your support on November 3rd. And if you have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Now with his closing statement, Tony Jurgens.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters for this forum. It has been truly the honor of a lifetime to represent the people of 54B the last 4 years. And I'm asking for your vote to give me another 2 years in the legislature. We've got tough decisions coming up in the next session, and I want to be there to be part of those discussions and part of the solution for all of you. We all here, all 6 of us up here, are either Democrat or Republican. But once the election is over, we don't just represent the people in our party, we represent everybody in our district. I think I've done that for 4 years. I'm ready to do it for another 2 years, and I hope you give me the chance to do that. And since I have a few seconds left, regarding the third-party expenditures and the mailers that are going to be coming out, legally, we can't contact those third-party individuals or those third parties, so I'm just going to say it right here. Don't send anything out on my behalf negative against my opponent. If you want to send something out, if you want to help me, make it positive on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. The League thanks the candidates for their participation, the SWCTC for broadcasting this event, the City of Cottage Grove for the use of their facilities, our League volunteers, and you, the audience, for your attendance and interest. Let your voice be heard. Vote.